wind rocked the canopy, causing it to groan. Quick as a breeze, fall had descended in a veil of crackling orange leaves. Yet on this hill of evergreens, where a trail twisted upward to the summit, the ground was clear and quiet, save for the occasional dark and muddy patch from a nearby spring. At the head of the trail, two slender trees crossed, their frames creating a single massive triangle through which all hikers must pass. Cody stared up at the strange geometric shape and wondered if it might be cursed. Who could say that it wasn't? It had only been a week since his last hike up this winding trail, and in that time, his life had been flipped upside down. Only then, he hadn't completed the journey. The summit was in sight, but he had turned back because the sun was setting. Perhaps that's why he returned now, to pass through the pointed gate once more, holding on to a spark of hope that by completing the rite of passage he started, it would undo the damage. It wouldn't bring his job back, it wouldn't pay his rent, but perhaps it would alter some cosmic scales which had been weighed down and out of his favor. Cody was prepared this time. He arrived at 1 p.m. with water and a small snack as a reward for when he reached the summit. It was only a mile and a half, only 645 feet in elevation. He would be up and back home before dinner. With a sharp breath, he placed one foot before the other and began to walk. Going was easy in the beginning, as it had been the week before. The slope was small, and on the ground was an even path of smooth stones deposited by centuries of drainage from the rain. As he strode through the malignant gateway, he held his head high, closed his eyes, and listened to the sounds of the forest. A spring trickled lightly in the foliage nearby. Distant hikers gossiped as they walked. Still, the trees cracked and groaned as the breeze forced their ancient limbs to sway. Those small steps were all it took to lighten his mood. Here in the trees, there was no rent, no work. His only responsibility was getting himself safely back home, and that he was confident he could do. The trail was an easy one for a beginner like himself. There were detailed signposts at every potential turn. The first would be a quarter of a mile in. Knowing that, his confidence grew. The hill began to slope more steeply, and the trail narrowed as it curved upward. The small natural cobblestones from the lower region were replaced by hard-packed dirt through which the roots of those massive evergreens snaked. Occasionally, Cody would need to fix his eyes on the ground to ward himself from tripping on the wooden serpent humps which rose up segmented like monsters on an old sea chart. It was during such a moment on his previous week's journey that he came upon 3 large banana slugs meandering their way across the narrow path higher in the hills. Feeling a sense of guilt for having nearly stepped on the smallest of them, Cody had found a stick and carefully allowed one to squelch onto the tip. He then released the slug by the end of a large tree which had been sawed down and left to fall against the hillside with its bare rings facing the trail. The larger two were more difficult to relocate with the stick, as they seemed remarkably eager to reach higher elevation, and moved with alarming speed up towards his hand. One even reached his finger, leaving behind a viscous slime, which he hurriedly rubbed off on his pants after flinging the stick, along with its excited slug, at the severed tree. The first signpost pulled Cody out of his memories. Knowing he wouldn't have a strong signal within the forest, he had looked up the trail online before leaving. Here it split in 2 directions. The left was a steep, winding switchback. The right was a large curve around the hill with a gentler slope. The sign pointed right, declaring it would be 1.5 miles to the summit. However, in his brief research beforehand, Cody had seen that by taking the switchbacks, he could reach a different trail that would get him to his destination faster. A short, uphill sacrifice for an advantage further along the path. So, with no further consideration, he headed left. The trail was steep, steeper than he had expected. Each step felt like a challenge. At some points, he had to grab the protruding roots along the ground in case his feet slipped on the smooth path. Sweat dripped off his forehead and down to the ground as he watched each grain of dirt go by. His mind cleared. There was no confidence, no regret, no joy, only the climb, upward, upward. Finally, he reached the top of the switchbacks, and the trail flattened again. Before he could celebrate his well-earned victory, the trees parted, and he found himself on the side of a road. That wasn't right. There was a trail. He should be in the woods. Cars zipped by along the curving road and up the hill. Cody turned to look back in the direction he had come. The switchbacks were there. He pulled out his phone to check the map. There was no trail beyond this point. The road would take him the rest of the way, but only by car. There were no sidewalks and no room to walk besides. He had to accept that he had gone the wrong direction and double back. Nothing was going right. It had been the worst week of his life. Even a simple hike was asking too much, apparently. As he walked down the switchbacks, he laughed at himself. He laughed at the world, the scales, the universe. Still, he trudged and slid his way back to the signpost. Now on the path he should have followed to begin with, Cody continued onward to the summit. He had to break the curse, to look out over the city and prove that he could achieve some victory, however small. The path around and up the hill was far easier than the switchbacks, and he had a pleasant time of it. Rounding a curve, there came into view the log where he had left the slugs a week before. They hadn't traveled far. In fact, they had climbed up onto the sheared trunk and halted there among the rings. Cody stopped to check in. The two larger slugs had formed a spiral, their heads connected by a bond of slimy yellow flesh. A mating dance with the world's slowest tempo, Cody thought. He glanced over at the smallest, which had settled a few inches away from the larger couple. It was motionless, one eye stalk exposed, the other buried deep in its body. It was covered in thick white hairs which tangled about its frame. Leaning in closer, he saw that they weren't around the slug. The hairs were inside it, weaving in and out of its rubbery body. A slender white parasite had infected the poor slug. Looking back to the larger two, he saw the same fibers, except they wove into the lovers, binding them in a dance not of creation, but of death. For if they were still alive after this week, Cody couldn't say. Shuddering, he walked away quickly, gazing off into the open ravine on the outer side of the trail. At least he wasn't the only one having a rough go of it, he supposed. The sun was shining diagonally down into the trees, casting long shadows across the hillside. Cody's watch showed 3 o'clock. There was so much time lost on the wrong path, but even so, that hardly seemed right. He had only walked for about a mile, yet 2 hours had already passed. Off away, out in the ravine between 2 trees, a long strand of web glistened in the retreating sunlight. Its host bobbed calmly on the breeze, waiting. The hiker increased his pace, lunging over roots, upward, scrambling, his breath dry and heavy. When his legs could no longer carry him, he paused and leaned against a tree, quenching his thirst with the water he had brought. When the bottle was empty, he gasped for air. A small flutter in the nearby undergrowth pulled him from his delirium. On the hill below, at the base of a tree, was a small bird, dusty and disheveled. It stared up at the tree, then flopped against it uselessly. Its wings moved in wild slaps as if to grab the trunk to climb. Why didn't it simply fly? Instead, it shook and slammed again against the rough bark, over and again in wild desperation. When the bird finally lay still, Cody saw the tangle of thick white filament sprouting from its feathers. A cold chill cut through the warmth of the afternoon sun. The forest was rotting. Upward. He must keep going upward to the light, to fresh air. He ran. Trees, roots, webs, branches, each in turn and again zipped past in a blur as Cody fought his way to the summit. Darkness crept in. The trail twisted and turned back on itself. Signposts pointed in every direction, but he didn't bother reading them. He just needed to go up. The trees were sick too. An oily slime coated their sides and formed sticky droplets which trapped any creature that touched them. The giants of the hillside groaned ever louder as their insides snapped and cracked in the wind. The curse was in the land itself. Every animal, every plant, it would never end. It would only bloom. Light hit Cody as he slowed to a stop. He was there. Through it all, he had reached his destination. The summit of the hill sat bare before him. No trees, no slugs, just a road and a small park where people sat on the grass, enjoying picnics and looking out over the city. They had taken the easy way. But Cody had put the work in. He had earned his place atop the hill. He walked past them all, ignored their frightened looks and hushed whispers. What right did they have to judge his appearance? His bottle was empty, so he stopped by a fountain. The water was fresh and cool, straight from the tower that fed the neighborhoods below. It tasted so good, he even licked the spigot. Its metallic taste sent sparks through his mind. Someone shouted, but he didn't want to listen anymore. Ahead, he spotted a nice place to rest. Between two trees, he sat and swayed with the wind, watching as the sun crept down in the west. Looking out over the city, he felt invincible. No problems could reach him here. He could stay up above the world forever. Upward! Upward. Cody pulled his snack from his pack. It was a plain granola bar, something left over from before it had all gone to hell. That was all he needed. Just a snack. He paused and laughed as he raised the reward to his mouth. It was funny. He had made so many mistakes getting here, but none of it mattered now. As he ate, he looked at the thick white hair growing from his hands and all the way up his arms. He felt the slick, throbbing filaments tickling beneath his skin. He gazed once more to the horizon as the tendrils filled his vision. Finally, he had done something right.